Welcome to CC Writes, where we explore good stories and how they're made. My name is CC Lepke. Today, I want to talk about Mob Psycho 100 and what makes it such a successful story. Mob Psycho 100 is about a middle school student with psychic powers that go out of control when he's stressed out. In the first episode, Reagan, who runs a shady paranormal consultation business, comes across a real ghost when he's helping a client. Reagan lacks psychic abilities, so he calls Mob, a middle school student with real psychic powers. Mob helps, but is irritated that Reagan called on short notice. A counter pops up indicating how close Mob is to exploding. Reagan later calls Mob to help exorcise an evil spirit inside a tunnel. Mob destroys the evil spirit and helps another spirit pass on to the afterlife. I'm going to look at this story with a focus on pacing, plot, character, and theme. But before I jump in, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification button so you can get notified when I post more videos like this one. The pacing in this episode generally sticks to a standard structure that you would see in most works of fiction. It has 3 acts, with a quarter of the story in the first act and a quarter in the last act. Most of the events occur generally when you would expect them to. There are a couple of standouts to the regular plot structure, though. The intro part of the story that explains the world and sets the understanding that there will be ghosts and psychics was a little too long. I'm not a huge fan of voiceovers in most cases, and the intro had a fantastic fight scene, followed by a boring gravestone with more exposition than I like. This threw off the timing right from the start and made the beginning feel more disjointed than it really needed to. It managed to get back on track almost immediately, but it still stuck out as something that could have been improved. The hook of the story is the countdown to Mob's explosion. Normally, a hook would occur in the first 5 minutes of a story, but in this case, it actually appears much later. However, the lateness of the hook's appearance is actually really effective. It gives the story room to breathe and operates as a fantastic introduction to the title sequence with a song that counts up to 100 to mimic the 100% stress level that Mob has to experience before his powers go out of control. Later on, the story gets a bit off track when the boss spirit in the tunnel provides his backstory. This isn't a particularly necessary story element and feels a little out of place. Structure-wise, it actually throws things off a little bit, which is why I would prefer it wasn't there at all. When Mob faces down the evil mountain spirit in the tunnel, the story gives a little more time after the fight than you would normally see, but the extra time is used effectively and doesn't have a negative bearing on the overall pacing. This episode actually does utilize great pacing technique. Nothing felt rushed or too slow. It makes for a complete story rather than a slice-of-life episode, while still leaving room for further development in future installments. There was never too much or too little time spent with any story element, giving the audience plenty of opportunity to stay engaged. The plot type used in this episode is actually a pretty classic one: overcoming the monster. In this plot type, there's a monster that terrorizes the world. In this case, the monster is established in the intro section as evil spirits. The monster causes havoc. The spirits in the tunnel were making bloggers and college students disappear. The hero goes to fight the monster and overcomes it, like when Mob defeats the boss spirit, only to find that there's a second, stronger monster, the evil mountain spirit. The hero fights the second monster, but all hope seems lost, like when Mob was swallowed by the spirit. And then the hero uses his hidden strength to overcome the monster, which is when Mob releases some of his pent-up psychic power and causes the monster to explode. Then the hero returns home victorious to accept his prize. In this case, ramen provided by Reagan. If you're a fan of classic literature, you'll recognize this as the plot for Beowulf. This episode of Mob Psycho 100 is actually really similar to Beowulf and speaks to the writer's genuine skill with crafting stories through his phenomenal execution of this plot type. There's also some well-done visual symmetry between the Shadow Psychic and the fight scene during the intro, and Mob when he gets swallowed by the spirit and uses his powers to destroy it. It makes for some good foreshadowing for later on in the series when his explosion counter reaches 100%. Reagan also foreshadows Mob's strength and the dangers of him losing control early on in the episode when he cautions Mob to never use his powers against people. The explosion counter, which starts at a low percentage and increases until it reaches 100%, showing Mob's stress level, is an effective and intriguing hook that never gets old no matter how long you watch the series. Again, the boss spirit's backstory and the voiceover at the beginning weren't strictly necessary plot-wise. The boss spirit backstory was cute, but the plot would have made sense without it, which means that it probably shouldn't have been there at all. The photo that Mob gives the boss spirit in the end provided enough backstory that it was almost repetitive to see it again. Except for a couple of unnecessary plot elements, the episode told a story that was on point from beginning to end. It built and released tension at just the right moments, and I understood why everything was happening at every point. If you've seen the show, let me know in the comments what you thought about the boss spirit's backstory. If you liked the backstory, let me know why. Maybe you'll change my mind. The characters in this episode are fleshed out really well, with Reagan and Mob set up as dual main characters that each have flaws and great desires established early on. Reagan is a liar who wants to make money as a paranormal consultant, and Mob is gullible, not that smart, and physically weak, and wants Reagan to teach him how to use his psychic powers. The secondary characters all establish important information about the world and still come across as fully fleshed out people, which is really impressive in such a short amount of time. Only one character didn't actually feel like a person. Tsubomi, Mob's crush, doesn't have any lines in the episode and is used more as a face than a human being. Later on in the series, this gets corrected, but it would have been nice to see her with more personality from the start. There are 3 major themes from the story that I want to focus on: strength, deception, and stress. It is continually pointed out that Reagan lacks spiritual strength. Despite his lack of strength, Reagan still manages to convince others to follow him and even has Mob, a strong psychic, acting as his student and lackey. This shows that although Reagan struggles morally and spiritually, he's actually mentally quite capable. Mob isn't physically or mentally strong. He struggles to answer simple questions in math class and can't keep up during gym. When people point out how powerful Mob is, he brushes it off and says that he's not strong. Mob's belief that he isn't strong is left a mystery in this episode, but there are hints that Mob doesn't view strength the same way that others do. Reagan is a liar. His deceptions are obvious and plenty throughout the episode. His clients call him a liar. He consistently deceives Mob out of money, out of food, and into doing his work for him. Even when he's actively caught in a lie, he flips it around and twists things until he can have control again. This deception leads to a nice ironic moment when Reagan calls the boss spirit a con artist and tries to get Mob to snuff the ghost. Reagan's deceptions could have led to disaster for himself and others at least 3 times during the episode if it weren't for Mob swooping in to save the day each time. Stress is a theme of the episode as well as a premise for the entire story. Stress builds up inside of Mob. The stress counter pops up several times throughout the episode, slowly ticking away to an inevitable explosion that actually doesn't happen during this episode. We're shown hints and foreshadowing that Mob's explosion will be serious, starting with the intro scene with a super powerful psychic fighting monsters in a wasteland. Later, Reagan makes a comment that Mob doesn't want his powers to go out of control. Then, in the final battle with the mountain spirit, Mob releases a burst of psychic power that looks the same as that released by the super powerful psychic at the very beginning. It drew a connection between Mob's abilities and the strength of the psychic at the beginning, and gave the audience a taste of what 100% stress might look like for Mob. The themes of this episode do a great job building tension and setting the mood and tone of the overall series. They also provide great callback elements, establish the characters within their personalities, and make the entire story more cohesive. I love Mob Psycho 100. It's a great character-driven story with flawed yet lovable characters, and it shows high levels of writing technique that any writer should aspire to. This is the kind of story I love to see, one that draws the audience in from day one and keeps them hooked all the way through. It would have been easy to take a story like this and turn it into a trope-fueled kids series, but that's why anime is so great. Just because it's a cartoon doesn't necessarily mean they'll default to common kids' storytelling methods. Instead, it leaves you with expectation and excitement to click on the next episode and see what happens next. It's a great story with fantastic writing that is 100% worth your time. Thank you for watching CC Writes. If you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also hit the bell so you can get notified when new videos come out. If you have any specific writing topics you'd like me to cover, go ahead and leave a comment below, and I'll go over as many subjects as I can. And if you want more content from me, then you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at cclepkewrites. My books are also available through Amazon.com. You can find them easily just by searching CC Lepke. Thanks again for watching, and have a good week!